Generations have grown up in India and abroad using Johnson & Johnson products, particularly the baby powder. And that's why Johnson & Johnson moving forward with a $6.475 billion proposed settlement of tens of thousands of lawsuits that have alleged its baby powder and other talcum powder products were contaminated with asbestos, causing ovarian cancer, evokes strong emotions. Johnson & Johnson has denied these allegations repeatedly, but there are at least over 50,000 litigants in US in this connection. Johnson & Johnson has continuously denied the talc asbestos cancer connect. However, the company discontinued sales of its baby powder in North America, parts of US as well as Canada in 2020 and the worldwide in 2023. The company now sells a cornstarch-based formula, though it continues to insist on the safety of talc products, as I said earlier. If a consensus is reached, J&J would resolve all current and future ovarian cancer claims against its products, which account for about 99% of the talc-related lawsuits that have been filed against the company. In India, in fact, it was in 1947 that Johnson & Johnson came to India first, started marketing baby powder. It was in 2022 that Maharashtra FDA cancelled the license for baby powder, particularly after it found the lack of quality in some of the manufacturing units. In 2023, the matter goes to court. Court allows the resumption of production. It was in June 2023 that Johnson & Johnson submitted an application to stop the baby powder manufacturing. In fact, they filed an application to stop the manufacturing of the baby powder. And after the courts moved, what they did was begin importing the cornstarch-based powder. The journey in India, for many people who would be listening to this, may hold so many emotions, and that's because so many generations, as I mentioned, including mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, have used this baby powder at some point. Now, talc is a naturally occurring mineral that can appear alongside asbestos in mines. Investigations by Reuters and the New York Times has found that Johnson & Johnson worried about the presence of asbestos in its talc for decades, but worked to keep the information from the public. Denied by Johnson & Johnson. Asbestos exposure is known to be highly dangerous, as inhaling it can lead to cancer, specifically in and around the lungs. There have been significant legal developments related to this issue, particularly in the United States. Theresa Garcia passed away in July 2020 after a mesothelioma diagnosis, a cancer. Her family filed a lawsuit claiming her extensive use of Johnson & Johnson's talcum-based baby powder to blame her for her illness. The jury recently found Kenvue, Johnson & Johnson's former consumer healthcare division, which became independent in August 2023, responsible for 70% of the factors contributing to Garcia's death. Johnson & Johnson and another subsidiary were deemed responsible for the remaining 30%. An Illinois jury ordered Johnson & Johnson and Kenvue to pay $45 million in connection to a baby powder lawsuit. Johnson & Johnson, of course, in this particular case, has also said that it will appeal against the ruling immediately and expects to be successful. And to quote them, the verdict in this trial is irreconcilable. The verdict in this trial is irreconcilable, and the decades of independent scientific evaluations confirming talc is safe, does not contain asbestos, and does not cause cancer. I'm being joined by a very important guest at this point. We are being joined by Jessica Dean, one of the attorneys who represented Theresa Garcia's family in their lawsuit. Thank you very much, Jessica, for joining us. You fought this case. Tell us what unfolded in the court. Tell us a little bit about this family.
So this was a case where she was diagnosed in January of 2020, and we got ready for trial. And weeks before the trial was to start, J&J started their first bankruptcy. As you know, they went through the bankruptcy process successfully until it was appealed to the Third Circuit, which found that they acted in bad faith. They then brazenly, 2 hours and about 15 minutes later, filed a second one, causing months more delay. We finally got our chance back to go back to court. Theresa Garcia died at 53 with 6 children of malignant mesothelioma, a cancer uniquely associated with asbestos. This was the first case our firm was able to take to verdict after these 2 fraudulent bankruptcies. We had a 5-week trial where Johnson & Johnson had an extraordinary amount of effort. I'm talking about a half a dozen law firms and over a dozen people fighting our small firm, and ultimately are still seeking to pay off the ovarian people, which is what you referenced earlier with the over $6 billion settlement offer. That is not my world. I only know things kind of from hearing about it from others, but believe that that doesn't even cover medical expenses for legitimate claimants, and that they're even willing to consider nominal payments where there isn't necessarily a legitimate claim, just to get the right people to vote for this plan to keep people from getting into the courtroom. And ultimately, for the people that do what I do for a living, they are refusing to engage in settlement unless you're willing to settle your entire docket, not just currently, but 10 years going forward, and then won't help anyone else in this fight. And so what Johnson & Johnson is trying to do in the United States, where there is a sophisticated consequence legal system, is silence the people that understand what they've done. I think we can prove that they were the leader in holding back an entire industry from selling something they knew was a carcinogen, because they got this unique benefit of being considered a baby company, even though they are a mega pharma company. And so they had an incentive that people like Avon or Mary Kay or Estee Lauder didn't have, and led this fight. And they will go to nothing to continue to protect their image and pretend like they didn't do what they did.
Jessica, would you help us to understand, in the court, while this case was being fought, how did you establish the connect between the Johnson & Johnson baby powder and asbestos and cancer? How was this proved before the court?
Theresa Garcia reached out to another firm that's local. We're a Texas-based firm. She was born and raised in Chicago. But we had done a few other talc cases, and so we joined in with them kind of during COVID. It was one of our first cases where we didn't get to meet her in person because it wasn't safe. And so we did her deposition. She wasn't able to complete it because she was so sick, but we were able to piece together her history from her mother, who testified, from her children, and from her brothers and sisters. She's one of 8. To show from the day that she was born, literally leaving the hospital, to a few years before she was diagnosed, she used this baby powder on herself, on her children, on her nieces and nephews, on her grandchildren regularly. She was a heavy user. Johnson & Johnson targeted particular populations, and the Hispanic population was a huge source of not only use of baby powder, Johnson's baby powder, but they were considered heavy users. And we were even able to find pictures of her little girls with powder literally from the neck down, kind of playing as children, and pictures of the powder in their home. So we not only had witnesses saying this is something she used her entire life, but we actually had photographs to see what the use looked like and to show that it was connected to baby powder. And then Johnson & Johnson does an incredibly lengthy investigation to see if there's anything else they can blame it on, because asbestos is in a lot of contexts. So they looked at abatement records in her school. They looked at every plant that was in a 5-mile radius that she lived in. They looked at what every person she lived with did for a living to try to find something, a scapegoat. And the nature of this disease is, even if there were other exposures, they all accumulate to cause harm in our bodies, but they couldn't even find anything else to blame. And so they just claimed that this was a spontaneous cancer, which can happen in many cancers. But at the heart of why I'm so passionate about this is They have used the lack of connection to asbestos in women in cases for decades to say that women just have this cancer spontaneously, stunningly more often than men, without an explanation biologically for why that would be so. And the reality is we're not somehow weaker in this regard. It's just we had a exposure route that was ignored, and not just because of ignorance. It was because a lot of companies, that's not accurate. A few companies led by Johnson & Johnson understood the problem and kept it from the public. And I really think part of the reason jurors are so incensed in these cases in a way that they're not in other asbestos cases I've done.
Right. Jessica, would you take us through what did the court say? What did the court say while giving out the judgment? What were the key observations? How did the court conclude on this?
So the court affirmed the jury verdict, which found not only for damages for the family that were relatively significant, but one of the huge findings that we had was also that this reorganization of companies with LLT turning, which used to be LTL, moving to a company called Johnson & Johnson Holdco to a company called Kenvue, was done in a manner which violated the laws of the states of Illinois. In essence, they were trying to evade liability and restructure things in a way that you just can't, even though that was their intent. So another huge victory here was, even if they try a third bankruptcy, even if they continue to try to buy off these claims in different ways that keep us from our juries, I think that finding that says Kenvue is also responsible for 70% of the harm is wildly important.
Right. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us, for taking out the time. You've been in a thick of a whole lot of things that you need to handle, but thank you for joining us in such a short notice. Our prayers with the family as well. All right. That was one of the big cases, the petitioner, the litigant in one of those big cases that you heard at this point. I'm also being joined by Mahesh Zagade, who's a former commissioner for Maharashtra FDA, Kasturi Shankar, who's an actor, Dr. Jyotsna, who's a pediatrician, and Rekha Agrawal, who's a consumer rights lawyer. Thank you very much, all four of you, for joining us. This is a conversation that will take time. I hope to delve in some points with all of you, giving ample time to each of you to speak. Let me just come across to Mahesh Zagade at this point. Mahesh, thank you so much for joining us, sir. My first question to you: you were the FDA commissioner in Maharashtra when the first case in India against Johnson & Johnson seemed to have come out in the open. What was it that you found wrong? Do you see any connect with what's coming out in the open over the last few years to what you found in Maharashtra, or were the concerns totally different?
Bring me here, and let me tell you one thing. There was a complaint against Johnson & Johnson for use of ethylene oxide, a carcinogenic chemical that was used to sterilize the powder. Sterilization is required because the talcum powder is very porous, and it is prone to have a lot of microbial load, bacteria and other microbial. So it requires thorough sterilization. In one of those batches, or few batches, they could not sterilize with the normal process of steam sterilization. So they outsourced the sterilization to another company, and where that company used ethylene oxide, which was not standard. In fact, they should have taken permission or informed FDA at that time as per the regulations, but they did not do it. Or alternatively, they could have discarded this particular batch or batches and save the consumers. Now there is when they sold these batches in the market, that means they expose people, consumers, especially children, because this is called baby powder, exposed to the carcinogenic substances. So when the complaint came in 2007, FDA did not do anything. When I joined FDA in 2011, I was going through the complaints against all the complaints, and I found that this particular complaint was not paid any attention. And I was told by officials that okay, such complaints keep on coming, but I was not satisfied. So we investigated, and we found that many wrongs were being done, and the company being $100 billion company, nobody wanted to touch it. But pursued this matter, we got investigated from by appointing a new team, and we found that there was truth in the complaint, and about 60,000 such bottles or packets were sold in the market, which was sterilized with ethylene oxide, and that exposed the consumers to the carcinogenic substance. So we showed them, we asked their response for this. They said, okay, these things keep on happening. Their response was not very proper. So we suspended, we canceled their license permanently. So that was one action that sent shock waves across the world, because to cancel Johnson Johnson license for such thing was not heard of. But since they were playing with the lives of the people, exposing them to the carcinogenic substances, we thought
Mr.
that
Mahesh,
this
Mr.
was the
Mahesh,
right
one
action.
thing, one thing that I need to ask you, Mr. Mahesh, the license were cancelled, but the case went on to the court, and from what I believe, the court allowed them to continue with their manufacture, to start with their manufacture again. Could you explain what really unfolded in the court then?
Okay, this court where for 90 days, this plant remained closed. Plant in the sense this manufacture of Johnson Johnson powder remained closed. That was stopped. And then matter went to the High Court. It was debated from both the sides. But court somehow was convinced about what FDA had done. But there are certain things which are beyond, so these public discussions. So the what court had taken a stand that okay, you give them one more notice, and then give them chance of hearing once again, and then you take a fresh decision. And that's how the matter came back to the FDA, and then notice was to be given. But by the time I was transferred, because they wanted to buy out the time. I'll tell you why they wanted to buy out the time. Because I had taken action against them, another product called hip joint. Johnson Johnson's subsidiary debut had supplied about 5,000 such faulty hip joints in India that caused immense pain and other complications in the patients. I had filed FIR against them, and of course, subsequently they sold out.
Mr. Mahesh?
So, yeah.
Mr. Mahesh, thank you for talking to us. Mr. Mahesh, there's also one more thing that I want to ask you, and because you have been a former FDA commissioner, there's no one better than to get through to you and ask you. You know, there've been so many cases that have come up over the last few months, whether it be about the masalas, the spices that we are consuming, whether it be the differential treatment when it comes to Cerelac, that's the baby food that is being used, whether it comes to the practice of sugar being used in health drinks beyond what is otherwise disclosed or otherwise considered as healthy threshold, to even talcum powder. There seems to be, on one hand, there seems to be some movement going, at least this is coming out to the fore. But is there concerns about what really is the standard in India? Because look at what's happening abroad vis-a-vis Johnson & Johnson. The number of cases, over 54,000 cases in US alone for that matter. But look at what's happening in India. Of course, it's an emotive issue. You have a lot of emotions associated in India. But where are the cases? Where are the facts? Where's the data? How can it be only in one country and not in the other country? I mean, so what's wrong? Is it something wrong with Indian standards, Indian laws, Indian enforcement, or is it just something larger?
Let me tell you one thing, that we have one of the best standards that are internationally compliant with many developed countries, and we cannot be saying that our standards or rules or regulations are weak and we cannot do anything. The 2006 Law of Food and Safety and the Cosmetic and Drugs Act of 1940 are like brought to the currency of time, and they are one of the best laws in the world. So we cannot really speak about the weaknesses of the law. Now the problem comes about the malady that afflicts the Indian regulator is that they are very weak in implementation. And they have become a little reactive.
Right.
Whatever happens, if there is some complaint and then it is investigated, or somebody abroad, they find something in that, and then the matter is like reacted and they start investigation. But the law requires that whenever such batches are manufactured, before the batches are manufactured, they have to check the purity of the raw material, and before the batches are released in the market, they have to again see that batches are proper or not. Unfortunately, it appears that the regulators across the country, and especially the national regulator also, they are not as strong in implementation, and they lack in this particular segment. My experience, personal experience with the FDA, that we can do wonderful job if we really push the administration, whatever the responsibility is given to them. Unfortunately,
Right.
we are not very much concerned with what happens to the consumer. The laws are that this should be prevented rather than action taken after the event has happened. This country should also know that the
Right.
laws are so robust that prevention is the basic spirit of the law, and not the punish the guilty, like punishment of the Johnson and Johnson. So
Right.
after the exposure and people exposed to cancer and then suffering, so there has to be prevention. One more aspect, let me tell you.
I think
Johnson
it's
and
just
Johnson, the
just the
litigation
same
happened in
issue
US.
coming out in a different form. Strong laws that really exist, but the enforcement possibly becoming even harder. But Mr. Mahesh, thank you so much for joining us in such a short notice. Allow me to just go across to others as well before, if you continue to join with us, I'll come back to you. Let me go across to Dr. Jyotsna at this point, who's a pediatrician. Thank you, Ms. Jyotsna, for joining, for your patience. A very important role before you, Dr. Jyotsna. Could you explain to us, can you connect the two very important aspects of what's unraveling at this point? How critical is what's happening with Johnson & Johnson, the baby powder? Of course, the baby powder is not there in the market anymore, whether it be in the world or in India. It's now cornstarch. It's a different formula that the Johnson & Johnson claims. But as a pediatrician, is there any concerns that stay with you?
It's criminal on the Johnson & Johnson part. It's really, I think it's criminal. Because complaints in US are for so many years, and they have, in fact, there are verdicts also, they have paid the damages. Like $2.1 billion for the ovarian cancer and $45 million for a case of mesothelioma. Plus, they have undisclosed amount they have paid probably in the first quarter of 2024, most likely some few $1 billion in mesothelioma cases. So mesothelioma is a really rare tumor, and which occurs in the tissue lining of lungs, stomach, maybe heart and other organs. It's, of course, a rare tumor, but asbestos has been incriminated in these cases. So, I mean, because in India, probably standards and probably the application of the laws are not so prudent. So, probably confirmed cases,
Sure.
and then, the verdicts are not there. But I think it's a criminal on their part.
But
they have banned only in 2023.
Can you draw attention to
so late.
What is it? How is talc connected with cancer? Could you explain to our viewers this? And how much of a challenge is this for the Indian user?
See, in mesothelioma, so now though it is banned, of course, in 2023 it is banned. No more they are producing this. But I'm really, cornstarch, what they are producing, importing, I'm really skeptical. What is this? So, because asbestos has been incriminated in mesothelioma, which is a tumor, and ovarian cancers also, but other factors are also there. So asbestos is definitely, and it has been found in their baby powder.
Okay.
So it is a direct, in fact, incrimination, of course. So, I mean,
All right.
In India, we have not so much proven cases. Yeah.
Right.
But definitely,
Okay, let me just go
relation
across to
has been
Rekha Agrawal
seen
at this point,
in
who's a
yeah.
I see. Okay. Dr. Rekha Agrawal joins us right now. You're a you're a consumer rights lawyer. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to break this down for us in terms of what's happening? When we say that J&J has filed for bankruptcy and the amount is going to help them pay the litigants, 99% of the litigants, at least with respect to the cases that are before it, what does this mean?
Very simply put, the company has declared itself to be insolvent, and according to the US company laws of insolvency, the company will have to prove that it has become insolvent. Simply by saying that I have become insolvent, you cannot be declared as an insolvent company or a bankrupt company. So it obviously means that J&J is in deep waters. And there are more than, I was reading the reports that there are more than 50,000 lawsuits pending against this company, particularly related to the health issues which have been caused due to the use of the baby talcum powder. So if the company is declared itself to be insolvent, then the amount of damages which all the litigants are claiming, all the people who have suffered injury, according to the US laws, there will be the line of creditors, the number of creditors, they will have to be paid by the company. So according to the financial institutions will have to be paid, for example, banks or any other financial institution, if the company owes any money to them, and if they're declared to be insolvent, then according to the degree of liability, the company will have to pay the money to the creditors. So, for example, the financial institutions will be paid first, and then after that, the unsecured creditors, because the financial institutions are what we call the secured creditors. And like in our country, we do not have a law of torts. We do not have a codified law of torts. We don't have a law of damages. But in the USA, it is a very clear-cut law of damages where the tortious liability can be fastened on the company. So after the financial creditors have been paid, then after that the J&J company will have to pay whatever remaining money is there. It will have to be paid to these claimants who have filed the lawsuits against them. So as I just said, that just claiming it to be, that we become an insolvent company is not going to be the end of troubles for the company. They first have to be proved, they have to prove themselves that we have become bankrupt, as I know that there's nothing more left to pay. And then after that, as I said, that in our country compared to the US, we don't have a strong codified law of torts to claim damages. All that we have is what is called a Consumer Protection Act, where a person can claim for deficiency of service, compensation for deficiency of service, and unfair trade practice. But in the US, it is a much more simpler way of claiming damages. So once the company declares itself to be bankrupt, then the liability will be limited. It cannot be an unlimited liability. So whatever is the money left in the kitty or the corpus of the company,
I'm also trying to understand, Dr. Josna, and this is something I'm trying to fathom. I'm trying to research about this, but I'm not getting much about this. You being an expert may be able to explain this better. I'm sure you and your family have also grown up across generations using this particular baby powder. Much of India has. Now, if one country is having so many cases and so many litigations, how does another country or much of the world remain silent on it?
Yeah, that is really, even in Europe, we don't see much of the cases. Why in US only? European countries, Australia, there also not much of cases. So I really wonder, because world over it was being used for generations. So even forget about India.
Okay, exactly.
Only,
so before I go to Miss
European countries.
Yeah. Before I go to Miss Rekha, again, Kasturi Shankar also joins us right now. Kasturi, thank you so much for your patience. Kasturi, as a public voice, as somebody who's, who people look at so closely, as a public figure, when you look at what's happening around you as a young mother yourself, what are your concerns?
I appreciate the legal aspect that the speaker before me brought in. I qualified to be a lawyer, but I'm more of an actor. And as you rightly pointed out, a parent. I will say this, listening to the FDA officer, Mr. Mahesh, I shudder to think of what else lies undiscovered in our households that we are using on a day-to-day basis, which we are exposing to our near and dear ones, because we are completely ignorant of what's going on. The case of Johnson & Johnson, I myself did not use baby powders on my children, but it is a family tradition to use Johnson & Johnson baby powder. Johnson & Johnson is synonymous with baby products. And for them to have, the thing is, we also have to understand that talcum powder, even in makeup, I'm an actor, you need to know this. I'm an actor, I use powder all the time. Any talc carries the risk of asbestos, and it has to be screened very, very carefully, because talc and asbestos are very similar minerals that are found in close proximity of each other. If you mine for talcum, you will end up getting residual asbestos in it. This is a known problem. It's a historical problem. And that is why it's very unfortunate that a brand, see, if I put something on my face, I have a caviar temptor on me, I'm an adult, but if I'm going to end up trusting a brand that promoted itself as a baby brand, that is where the outrage is just, it's unsurmountable. It's just horrible to think of all the people that we've thrown powder at. I mean, this is summer. Every time summer comes up, it's not just talcum powder, not just baby powder, it's prickly heat powder, it's cooling powder, any powder. We need to start re-evaluating it. And as Officer Mahesh said, the problem in India, at least, I think shared by some developing nations as well in the third world, the problem is in India, human suffering, human lives are actually not that valuable compared to corporate muscle. This is the bitter truth. You don't have to pay $45 million damages. You don't have to pay $700 million lawsuits. You can get away by paying far less. Dow Chemicals just changed its name in the Bhopal gas tragedy. They just changed their name and they continued operating. They just, I don't know if you were a part of that generation. I'm a 70s kid. And I remember that we thought justice was going to be served, and it wasn't like powder where mesothelioma is still a rare occurrence in India. Also, exposure to asbestos is very high in India, over and above, notwithstanding talcum powder exposure. So we really don't have grounds to take on them saying our exposure was purely due to powder. But with a company like Dow Chemicals, what are we doing? We have an entire generation suffering with visible side effects of the gas, of the tragedy, and what have we done? What have we done to our people? So right now, MDH, take the case of Cerelac. It's just audacious for a company to go ahead and give one kind of product for Europe and for Australia and for the US and Canada, and give a completely different product to Asia and Africa and to Latin America, because they can get away with it. They're doing it understood. They're doing it because they want they want to make it cheaper, because according to them, people want a cheaper alternative, but they had no business. I get it, but they had no business selling it under the same brand. If you're making it a sugary concoction, call it confectionery, Cerelac confectionery, Cerelac chocolate, Don't Cerelac candy, don't call it Cerelac baby food. If that's what you want to do, you say sweetened baby food. There is no disclosure in places like India. Although I think the spices part, again, trusted names like MDH and Everest, the FDA official talked about ethylene oxide. Unfortunately, ethylene oxide is a regular product. In regulated amounts, it is acceptable to fumigate
Right.
and to sterilize your products
No,
with
that's
it.
true.
Without which a lot of products, including spices, will not be available for consumption, will not be suitable for consumption. So it's the lesser of the two evils. It's just that when there are unacceptable limits, and with Europe, I tend to side with us because farmers here need to be educated on how much they can use at every stage in the manufacturing process, which do not come under the direct control of the ultimate brand, ultimate vendor. You cannot be controlling micro milligrams of fumigant. And in Europe, they do. So I tend to go a little different from contra to European standards. I have to tell you, European standards are not global standards. They are European standards. They are usually tougher than the rest of the world. But at the end of the day,
No, there are such important concerns that you are raising, Kasturi, particularly as a new age mother, as a new age consumer. That's unfortunately, despite though, as
I think
my previous panelist Mahesh was pointing out, you have some very strong regulations in place, but it just seems to fall apart when it comes to its enforcement. Rekha, I'll get back to you, Ms. Kasturi. Rekha Agarwal, to you, if I can come again. Okay. Rekha Agarwal, when you look at what's happening in India and what's happening in US, let's look at India. India is a cancer hub in Asia. It's a country which is having one of the highest number of cancer cases in India. What should consumers be worried about? Should they be worried about? You heard Kasturi speak right now. What comes next in the house that may trigger, contribute to a higher level of cancer or make you more susceptible towards it? The question is, do the consumers have a right to know? And if they want to know more, how does India look at that?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Let me first, tell the viewers over here that we as Indians are very proud of the fact that we have what you call the Constitution of India, where all citizens of India have got what are called certain fundamental rights. So one of the most important fundamental rights that every citizen has is the right to life, which includes right to good health. So that is a given that, we have a right to live the life in a healthy manner, not just live in a, just not existence, not a vegetable existence. And it means that all these big, huge multinational companies cannot use India or any third world country as a dumping ground for their products and state that the standards are different. The US standards are different and the Indian standards are different, and dump those goods which could ultimately be harmful to our health. Having said that, I would state over here that compared to the other countries, as I said in the beginning, in the first round of talks, that we do not have a codified law of tort. That is what disadvantage that we all Indians have. So whenever we have to claim damages, vis-a-vis the English standards or vis-a-vis the US countries, that we are at a loose end, and the consumer does not have a right to go and file a lawsuit immediately claiming damages. What the consumer can do in our country is take protection of what is called the Consumer Protection Act. And very recently in the year 2019, in fact, in our country, the Consumer Protection Act was made in the year 1986. And it has recently been amended in 2019, where under the new law, the right of the consumer to be aware and the right to ask questions has been there's no level it could have been, clarified, and it cannot be, that right cannot be denied to any consumer. So all the companies, especially companies which are selling packaged products, whether it is food products or whether it is cosmetic products, they have to disclose every ingredient of the food product or the other chemicals which are going inside the product. They have to be very clearly spelled out on the label and in a manner in which the consumer can understand, not in a wishy-washy manner, not in a cosmetic, not just paying lip sympathy to the consumer. And as far as certain products are concerned, they have to conform to what are called the FSSAI standards. And at the same time, in 2019, we have got the new authority, which is called the Central Consumer Protection Authority, where even if the consumer is not aware of the potential danger to his health, which could be being caused by a food product or by a cosmetic product or any talcum powder, even if it comes to the knowledge of the Central Consumer Protection Authority, they can take suo motu action. Now in our country, now just taking a cue from the Illinois judgment of J&J, the CCPA has got the power to take judicial note of the lawsuit which has been passed in favor of the victim, and a huge amount of damages have been awarded to her. In our country also, the CCPA, I think it is high time that the CCPA takes suo motu cognizance of the American judgment and conduct an inquiry into this matter and see whether any such products, whether it is J&J or any other company for that matter, is selling talcum powder. And since we're talking about talcum powder at the moment, talcum powder, any other cosmetic product which could be harmful and injurious to health, whether it is due to asbestos or whether it is due to content of lead. Very recently, we had this controversy about Maggi. You may recall that about 2-3 years ago, there was a class action case filed by the government. The first class action case was filed by the government against Maggi noodles on the ground that the content of lead was very high. But surprisingly, just about 15 days back, that judgment has been overruled, where it has been held that the content of lead is acceptable. So a lot of things have to be studied in detail before any judgment can be passed against any company. But I'm very confident that as we have got very, very stringent laws in our country, where under the Consumer Protection Act, we can sue for deficiency in service and we can sue any company for unfair trade practice, including misleading advertisements. So all these big celebrities who are endorsing such products, they also have got a duty towards them to see that they do not become party to marketing such goods which may be potential carriers of risk to the health of any person. And I think that now it is high time that CCPA takes judicial note of what has happened in the USA, conduct a survey of all the talcum powders. Why only J&J? Let all the talcum powders which are being sold off the counters, let us see what is the content of asbestos in them.
Absolutely, and particularly if talc as such has very close links with asbestos, as seems to be coming out more and more with research for that matter. Kasturi Shankar, 40 seconds to you to make your last comments. You're pretty much a celebrity yourself. You're a mother yourself. You're a consumer yourself. You're a lawyer yourself. But how much of a fix do you find yourself in?
I think my biggest grievance out of all this is that once again we're reminded that Indians are second-class citizens in our own country, where international corporates take us for granted. And it is a situation that we can blame them, we can blame the big corporate lobbies, but more than that, it is a time for introspection even for ourselves. We vote based on religion, we vote based on caste, we vote based on all sorts of platforms, but we don't vote based on who will ensure us dignity and equality in the world arena, where Indians will be treated as human beings just like everybody else in the world. I blame the corruption and the lackadaisical attitude of the court system, of the delays, of the justice that we will always have to wait until we are dead and beyond our grave for. That is the kind of, our system is corroded. Our system is corrupted, our system is adulterated, and that is why we're not able to fight against these very, very just fights against adulteration, from big brand companies. So I hope that as a mother
Absolutely.
and as a
I think a
consumer
lot of
and
citizens
as
would
a
echo
celebrity
with
who
what
uses all this,
you're saying.
I hope the world will wake up to a better India.
Right. And Dr. Jyotsna, the last comments from you, 30 seconds. What do you want to leave your
I want
viewers
to
with?
just,
Concerned parents, young
I
children?
just
What do
want
you
to
want to
talk
leave them?
about Cerelac. Cerelac. Yeah. I want to talk about Cerelac. So I always believed before it was proved that all the tint cereals, they definitely contain sugar. And in my life, in my practice, I never prescribed any tint cereals. I always believe in giving fresh food. And as a mother and as a grandmother, I have never ever given to my children or grandchildren ever any tin food. I always believe that these are not good.
Right.
And contain sugar. All the tin food, all the beverages, they should not be given to the children. Yeah.
Sure. I think that's very sound advice to stay with. Thank you very much, Kasturi Shankar, Dr. Jyotsna, as well as Rekha Agarwal. I'm sure with whatever you have shared, viewers are leaving this show with much more information, equipped with more information and knowledge than when they joined. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
It's time for a very short break.